Hey guys, I'm Lyndon.
And I'm Angelica.
And we're Untying Knots. Welcome to our second episode where we're going to talk about the legality of marriage today.
Yes, when you get married, you are legally bound to this other person. So get ready for this.
So we have a special guest with us this morning. We have Miss Naomi Garcia.
Yes.
Welcome to the table.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. How you feeling?
Good. This is my first podcast, but thanks for inviting me.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now that's got a rookie today.
Very much so, yes.
Okay, love it.
With lots of knowledge. That we need. That everybody needs.
So what do you do, Naomi? Tell us.
I'm a lawyer in Houston. I do family law, criminal law, and immigration, some probate, but predominantly family and immigration.
Okay. Is that like your specialty or just like a preference?
It's my preference, but it's more or less a specialty as well because you do it regularly. I do it all the time, and it impacts all the other areas of law that I also do. So I don't just look at it from the family perspective. I look at it from all the other consequences that can derive from the marriage relationship or having children with someone, a separation relationship in general.
Got you. How long have you been practicing law?
Since May 2010.
Okay. So you're not new to this. You're true to this.
Yes, very much.
And you are also divorced as well.
I am. So that actually gave me a lot of personal experience, fortunately. But yes.
Unfortunately?
Yes. Fortunately and unfortunately. Fortunately, because I can tell you personally what really might happen. Yep. And then, but unfortunately, because none of us expect to get married to have the problems that we have from the legal perspective.
So as a lawyer who practices family law, when you got married, did you ever think about the possibility that you would get divorced?
From a very distant perspective, I thought it could be a possibility, but I actually never believed I would end up divorced. So I didn't really believe it.
I feel like that's how it always is. Like nobody ever who's been divorced, ever gets married thinking that you're going to be divorced.
For sure.
Right. I think that'd be really stupid if you did think that,
But then that's what people think about getting prenuptial agreements, right? Like you kind of think about the end at the beginning.
I don't actually agree that the purpose of the prenuptial or postnuptial agreements are because you think you might get divorced. I actually think it's the opposite now that I'm older and have gone through a whole lot more. The prenups and the postnups, I feel, are things that you think about when you actually want to stay together and you're thinking logically, reasonably, and competently. Maturely is a good word too.
Wow.
So you're pro prenup.
Totally pro. Even if you're broke, I believe you should have one because you might have money later.
Thank you. Yes.
100%.
I mean, we're all growing.
I felt the same way. So when I got married, I was like 25, 26, right? And at the time, I didn't have any assets. I had like $167 to my name. My most valuable possession was like my CD collection. I didn't have anything. And at the time, I didn't think about my future self. And even though I was working towards, building and acquiring assets and advancing my career,
right?
I'm like, this is my wife. We locked in. This is for forever. I'm like, we're going to our last breath. And I never thought like, well, shoot, 7 years from now, you're going to have a lot more things that you probably need to protect and ensure. Not in the event of like selfishly from my wife, but just as an insurance and protection for the future of our kids. Preservation is kind of how I looked at it.
Well, I agree with all that, but I also think it just takes a load off your shoulders because then you can actually appreciate the person and the relationship more. And now you don't have to worry about what's going to happen if it doesn't work out, because that's also a major stress, I think, that causes problems in the marriage that's not really necessary.
So
that's a great perspective.
Yeah. So do you see a lot of divorces that are financially related? Is that the most common that you see?
Financially related, meaning like problems in the marriage because of financial issues.
Maybe it's gambling. And
there's so many issues.
Whatever.
Strippers.
It could be.
Addictions.
So I think the normal vices are the cheating. Everyone knows what cheating is, typically. We all agree there's financial pressures in marriage. Those are obvious issues. If there's an imbalance of power, control, manipulation, any party can have those problems. Both of them can have them. And I think that, and then if you have children, that's a whole other part of the process that some people don't have children, so they won't have to worry about that one. But children add a whole other stress level to a relationship. That's where your character really shows. That's when I think a lot of people start to realize who that person really is that they married, because until you have that additional load, you really don't know who they are a lot of times. And then also there could be other vices, though, that you are unaware of that can be so covert under the cover.
That was on me.
Right. So those normal vices, unfortunately, get so much attention. Drug abuse, those are obvious. But some of us don't have that problem, we think. And then we find out that our situation is actually worse in a lot of ways because it's not obvious.
Right.
I feel like that was my situation. And yours, obviously.
Yeah.
Would you feel like that was your situation as well? Or was
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I would never be able to prove in court half of the stuff that I know is the truth, because they're not going to have, most times, the type that I had to deal with, they don't have a criminal history. So I'm not going to have the situation where, yes, I have proof that he's violent. I have proof that he's going to be abusive to the children, or that he could be harmful to the children. Most of the time, you're going to have a really a big struggle to get proof for those types of things, because a lot of our partners don't have the obvious vices that the society will deem to be a problem.
Man, that's so interesting that you say that, because that's so true. That's so valid.
That's deep.
So do you think that a lot of those issues can be identified up front? Like, were they red flags that you feel like as a divorce attorney and you hear people's stories like, well, shit, it was kind of obvious from the beginning?
So I thought I totally have done that introspective search now that I've gone through what I went through. Like, what was I thinking? But the truth is, you can, but there's also it's not always there. The red flags that we commonly, I think, understand are the criminal histories, if they have a wild lifestyle, or even just the type of character they portray while you're dating them. However, some of these people look to the common person as being nice people. They don't stick out as a sore thumb, but that in itself can be a red flag.
Yeah, it's just like my ex.
If they go to church all the time, that's all they do, that can be a red flag, but we may think that it's a good thing because now we're like, oh, they love God, or, oh, they love volunteering. But that can be good, but then that can also be a red flag, because why are they always volunteering, right? Why are they always at church? If they're a little bit too different, I think that automatically is something you should be looking into, because it could be a good thing, but it can also have hidden issues that you're not aware of.
Yeah.
Damn, so we can't even be at church all the time. And that's a red flag.
And I hate to bring the church into it, because I volunteer, my parents volunteer all the time. They're good people. So that's why I'm just saying.
They sound like a red flag.
And then once you get to know them, you're like, okay, good. They're safe.
Right.
But before I thought no drug abuse, the pornography, never noticed that being an issue. Never saw him. There was no cheating issues. So all the basics, you thought, okay, I'm safe. And then you find out you're probably less safe because they are so abnormal.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And that's sad that we have to look at it from that perspective sometimes.
It's sad that we have to even say that word, they're safe, or they're the safe bet. Because I feel with my ex, I chose him because I felt like he was the safe bet. Whereas somebody who I thought would have not been the safe bet probably would have been. Does that make sense?
That's completely my story too.
Yeah, he was very kosher. He was very, introverted, read a lot of books, that type of thing. And obviously ended up not being the person I thought he was. Mm-hmm. So, right. But I want to get into, I don't think people understand the legalities of marriage and what it is to be married. And you are signing legal paperwork within the state that you are getting married. I feel like a lot of people get excited with the ring and the wedding and all the planning and really don't think about the legalities of a marriage. Exactly. So I want to get into that, and it's almost like, let's say you're dying, you as a spouse have the only say of whether they disconnect you or leave you on the ventilator, even down to those things. It's crazy. So I want to get a little bit more into that.
No, and one of the most like meaningful parts or celebrated parts of a wedding is signing the marriage license. Like I remember at my wedding, it was like everybody gathered around the table, they're signing the marriage license. And it was like my brother was like my witness. And it was like such a big deal.
Right.
Not knowing like, bro, you signed like a death certificate. You didn't even know it.
How am I going to get out of
Somebody should have
this?
stopped me.
Right.
But no, that is, and at the moment, like, once again, I never knew like this is a legally binding, I guess, contract, if
Agreement,
you will.
yeah.
Agreement,
Mhm.
adding in a third party, which is the state and a government power involving should things go a different direction. I never, ever, ever considered that until I'm going through a divorce after I got subpoenaed. And now I'm trying to figure out like what my rights are on the fly. You know what I mean? Like I didn't even have ChatGPT to help me figure out my rights.
Right. And then the legal
So,
feelings start coming
Then
in.
I'm like, should I represent myself? Do I need
Right.
an attorney? Then she lawyered up. I'm like, I think I could be her lawyer by myself.
Right.
But so help us to understand, what is the legal definition of a marriage?
Well, first of all, there's the celestial marriage. That's the spiritual aspects part of a marriage that people don't realize is not the legal part of the marriage. So if you believe in God or any type of higher being, you may have the ceremony, and that's its own marriage between you and the higher God or source, right? But then what we typically think of marriage is the legal part of the marriage, which is what we all understand it to be. That's why you do joint tax returns as a married couple. So the legal part of the marriage is where the Texas laws that govern, the Texas family code come into play. And that dictates what happens if you don't get along anymore. And now you either want to get divorced, or in some cases, if you were never married, separated and you have children. So that's what the definition of marriage, basically, in my opinion, is there's the celestial mixed with the legal part of it. So some people don't even have to have a ceremony where they believe in God, but they may still have a ceremony of some sort of their own. And that's really the celebration of it, I believe, with family and friends. But then you have the legal consequences that you don't even realize, like you said, are going to come into play. Hopefully, you won't ever have to see them or acknowledge them. But for a lot of us, we do have to. And so a marriage is actually the combination, I believe, of any kind of spiritual mixed with the legal ramifications that your state will then govern, like you said, when you end up in court.
How is that different in a common law state? And what is a common law?
Exactly. That's a great question. So common law, and all these laws change depending on what state you're in, first of all. So as a licensed attorney, we can't do a divorce or a suit affecting parent-child relationship, which is a separation between the parties if they have children. We can't just do it in any state because we have a license in specific states. So as far as a common law, Texas requires you to have been married 2 years, and you have to hold yourself out as husband and wife in public. So this is my husband, this is my wife, and then we may even have witnesses to have to testify to that in court if the other party claims it's a common law and they don't agree. Wow. And then you have to also have a declaration of marriage, usually filed with the county, but how many people actually file a declaration of marriage? Otherwise, they just go get married.
Right.
So the way that we can help prove that would be more of a commingling of assets. Like if you have a joint contract, you have joint filing taxes jointly as a married couple, anything you have together, insurance, car insurance, financial accounts. I mean, those are all ways and methods that will try to prove that it's an actual marriage, that y'all both had the intent to be married, in addition to those other elements.
So basically, like, don't post your girl on IG.
Oh, don't post your wife.
It was a joke.
I know, but I
Don't
didn't
post your girl on IG. Don't post a wife on IG.
Oh, yeah, don't do that. Yeah, don't put this is my wife. That would be a good thing not to do.
No, you got me. No, that makes sense.
I'm trying to figure out what to do.
You're like, what?
That's funny.
I should just say yes.
No, okay. So if that's the definition of marriage. Then on the reverse side, are there different types of divorces, and what legally is a divorce?
Yeah, so that would have the same legal effect and ramifications, consequences as a legal marriage, as one where you had a license that you signed, like you said, in front of everybody or in a private room. But it's got the same consequences. So Texas Family Code governs the divorce situation, custody. We say custody, but it's really conservatorship of the parents. If you have children, it governs child support. It governs alimony, which in Texas we call spousal maintenance. It also governs any other aspects, access and visitation, access and possession of the children. There's a visitation schedule. There's going to be some type of schedule. And so it really it's going to be the same exact consequences. Now, as far as the property, that's a whole other area of law. And when there's a divorce, a lot of times people want a common law marriage if the other party made money. Because then they can try to take some of their assets, some of their property. Because otherwise, what would be the incentive? You can still get child support through the Attorney General's office or even through the courts in a separation agreement called a SAPSR, suit affecting parent-child relationship, without being divorced. So I feel like the only real reasons would be if there's other implications, maybe immigration consequences, or you may want to have the ability to petition for another party, even though you never got legally married with a license. A common law marriage can be considered a legal marriage even under immigration law. So there's reasons other than just the obvious why you may want to be considered common law married. And it has the same consequences legally. Wow. If you get divorced.
And I know that there's some specifications for common law, right? If you're living together, can you tell us what those are for those that are technically common law marriage, even if you're not entered in an actual legal binding agreement of marriage? I just want to know, because I remember when I came out of my marriage, my attorney said, don't do this, and don't do this.
Well, basically, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but if you're not wanting to be common law married, don't hold yourself out as husband and wife, which just means don't call him your husband. Don't joke around. Sometimes it's cute to pretend. It's not cute, though, later. If you don't want to be with them. It's not cute, especially when they're trying to take your money or vice versa, especially if you have a kid or two that you share together. So you don't want to play house to that level.
That's what I was going to ask. It was like, don't play house.
Don't live with them.
Don't commingle the finances.
Definitely don't commingle. Yeah. Don't have anything together. But if you live with the person, you may have a joint lease, whether it's in both names. And that can also be enough to maybe show it's a real relationship. So we would have to show a marriage relationship. So we would even have to have witnesses maybe in court to prove it's a common law marriage if the other party says it's not. But if they don't argue it, then we'll just assume it is from the date of living together.
You'll assume that it is.
Wow.
If the other party doesn't dispute it and your client's
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. So is there a specific time where, let's say you move in with somebody, like is it 4 years? Is it 2 years?
2 years.
2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
2 years. Now, if you've been separated though for over 2 years, I'd have to double check, but I believe if you've been separated for over 2 years, it's now going to be too late to try to argue common law marriage. Oh. So there is a deadline. It's not like 20 years later we can.
You said deadline. I hear loopholes.
That's what I was thinking. So I was thinking, how do we structure this next relationship?
Exactly.
Don't live with her. Don't call me hubby. Don't post me on IG. Don't even play like that.
Don't come and go. That's why I got confused.
I think there was another
on your IG. Right. Don't say hubby.
Play with me.
Yeah. I heard that there was another thing was definitely don't file together for sure.
Yeah, that would be so obvious.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think the best piece of evidence, if you're common law, if you're arguing it, is the joint filing as a married couple on a tax return.
Or having a shared account.
Yeah, having shared accounts, although that could be a little bit more ambiguous. Having a joint lease agreement, the more things you have together, the harder it would be to argue. But I really think the tax return has the strongest weight because that's the whole purpose, is to get the credits or the advantages of a married couple.
Right. And I know Texas is a very unique state because I know there's caps on child support. A lot of people don't know this. I had met a guy that had 3 different baby mamas and had 3 children. And he's like, oh, I'm good because every time I have a kid, I only have to pay $2,300, which I'm assuming it was the cap per child in the state of Texas.
Right. I think it's 1,840. Don't quote me, but yes, it's around that amount for each child, for one child. And then it's capped, I believe, at your net monthly income of about 9,400 a month, on or about. So you can't just, so if your goal is to make money, it would probably be better to try to do some kind of agreement.
Right.
To have them take care of you later if it doesn't work out. That's why I'm saying like a prenuptial agreement and a postnuptial agreement, they have their purpose. I don't think it's always just so you can anticipate the doomsday at the end of the divorce, of the relationship. It's really just to make it clear what your intentions are as a couple.
Yeah, I'm all for it because my intentions were were all messed up.
To my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, prenuptials aren't just like, hey, what's mine is mine and yours is yours if this relationship doesn't work out. It's kind of a little more complex than that with like sunset clauses and things of that nature, right?
Yeah, basically my stuff's mine and your stuff's mine. No, I'm just kidding.
It doesn't exist?
No. I mean, but what you said is true. Largely, it's to keep your separate property separate because a lot of times it can get commingled later. So that can still be a problem. If you know, let's say you have all this money in your account, that's your separate property. But if you commingle it into a joint account after you get married and then y'all go and you buy stuff, well, how do you trace it and prove it's separate property now?
So that's why my ex never
and now they have rights
wanted
to
a
that
joint account.
asset.
Exactly. So first, Texas is a community property state. Not all states are community property states. And and what that means is typically we think of it as 50-50. When you get divorced, it's halved, right? We all have to have everything: retirement accounts, financial accounts, property, assets, debts also. So you have to be careful too that that person has good spending habits, that they're not just going to have all these debts everywhere after you get married. So you may want to, you'll want a prenuptial agreement, in my opinion, just to cover all those basics. One of the main purposes of what you said, though, is your separate properties, whatever you owned before marriage, also whatever you inherited from anybody, your parents, during your marriage would also be considered separate property. But if you go and use that later on a community property asset where you go buy a house together, well, now you've made it a community property asset where you both own it 50-50 now. So you could do a prenup or even a postnup, a contract between the two parties that intend to get married, basically, and afterwards, after you're married, to show and prove what y'all want the status of that property to be. So if I want to go buy a house and we're married, that would be joint property. That would be together, 50-50. But we may want to have a prenuptial agreement that just says that the specifics of how that would work out, just to have, I think, for peace of mind.
Yeah. And do you revise or amend that as you acquire more assets?
I think you could always amend it, but at the end of the day, the status or the nature of the asset probably largely would already have been identified and explained in the prenuptial agreement. Because, I mean, unless you're extremely rich, how many assets will you acquire? And the assets are still going to be the same type of anticipated assets from the prenuptial agreement.
Understood.
If you have 5 houses, same as having 1.
Yeah.
But, and then a misconception a lot of people have is that if they buy a house after they're married and they put it in their name only, and then they're paying for it on their own because they made money from their earnings, that it's their own house or it's theirs now when they get divorced. And it doesn't matter whose name it's under. It's just the fact that you purchased it after the marriage date. So it's a community property state, and under the default distributions, the other party would be able to get 50% of the value of that home. So now you got to think about, am I going to sell the house?
Right.
If we don't get along, how much debt is on it? How much has been paid? How much equity is in it? How much can we get for the house? You have all these things that people don't even think about later. They just think I have a house. Another problem I see a lot is when a guy, I say guy because this is still more typical, but when a spouse is taking care of the other spouse, she's a homemaker per se. Maybe you have 1 or 2 or more children. They think that if they get divorced, they don't have to give them everything because they paid for it. But it's anticipated that you were going to pay for it if the woman was a homemaker, stayed home, never worked. So you really have to think about balance of power.
Boy, that sent me through the fire when I went through my divorce. Oh, I was so hot. Do tell. Well, my ex-wife was a stay-at-home mom for 5 years up until we got divorced. And so in my mind, I'm thinking like, well, of course I'm going to help out with other things, but they wanted me to pay like so much extra money for alimony, or was it spousal support, and such a high child support. I'm like, look, I have a budget every month. These kids don't even cost this much money per month. Like, I know how much I spend. They're like, well, since you're not there, it's all these extra expenses and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's just not even fair. Like, that's not even fair. Family law is not fair.
It's definitely not fair.
It's not fair. Oh my God.
There's nothing fair about the law.
I was so hurt. Oh, I was so hurt. And what happened was, I always say this, like, it's such a weird dynamic. Like, one day, a month prior to our divorce proceedings, I love this woman. 30 days later, I'm in the middle of a bloodbath war with this woman. Like, man, I can't stand you. I hate you. Like, it can get really nasty if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And it's just weird how all that shifts. And for me, it was because the legality of it started to kick in. And all the emotions that we had or why we got married were irrelevant to the case before a judge.
Oh, gotcha.
And then because it was like, well, you're the breadwinner, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and she mothered 2 of your kids, then this is the new arrangement. And I'm like, yo, y'all are treating me like a deadbeat dad. Like I didn't like take care of everything. And so that was really hard for me to accept and process. And
I've seen that, and I agree with you. It can go both ways. That's the other thing that's a big misconception. So I'm speaking it kind of from your point of view right now. It does typically happen to the males in that fashion, or if if the guy worked a lot too to support his family. Let's say he had legitimately good reasons that he worked really hard. He didn't want the wife to have to be struggling and wearing all the caps in the house, the man cap, the woman cap, the homemaker cap, whatever cap you want to label it.
Right.
But the bottom line is, the more stress that a woman has when she has children, the harder it is for her to do any job well.
Right.
However, we all do it, a lot of us. So I'm not saying it's impossible. But what I'm saying is, the males or the guys that work really hard, they can end up gypped to some extent if they get divorced or separated, because now they haven't been around the children as much because they couldn't possibly be around them if they're working all the time. They also aren't going to be the ones taking them to school every day. They're not going to be the ones there when the children are sick. Usually it's going to be the mom. They're not going to be the ones taking them to the doctor's office. They're just not going to be that nurturing party that they might have been if they had had the opportunity to be home more often. So it can definitely be unfair or feel unfair when you're going through a legal process that doesn't care about your emotions. Honestly, they just don't care. It has nothing to do with the legal aspects.
Who did what? Who showed up?
I was mad at everybody. The judge, my attorney, my ex-wife. I was mad at everybody.
Yeah.
So, okay. So 3 rapid fire questions, right? As we wrap up. Number 1. What advice would you give to someone who is considering divorce based on your own experience?
So before I would give them advice, I'd probably want to know a little bit more about why they're wanting to get divorced, what the problems are. It's going to be real hard for them to give me a summary that actually gives enough information, because it's too hard to explain your whole life with that person, depending on how long the relationship was.
Yeah.
So my first question would be, how many kids do you have? Do you have kids? So then I'll ask them, who was with the children the most? Kind of like we were saying earlier, who was around the children the most? That party is probably going to have a stronger case for conservatorship in terms of not necessarily diminishing their rights as joint parents, but who's going to end up paying child support. So the party who ends up with the children the most, who always was closer to the children, usually not the one who works all the time, unless you're more equal in that way, is going to be the one receiving child support. So then I'm going to ask the person probably, how much does that person, the other party, earn? Where do they work? And what type of relationship did they have? Were you a homemaker? Did y'all both work? Are y'all mostly equal in terms of earning power, earning capacity, education? All those types of questions are important. So I would say, once you've diagnosed or kind of evaluated their equality or lack of equality in the relationship, then I'll let them know what they're facing. Because if you're even a homemaker, now she's gonna have to go get a job at some point.
Yeah, as she should.
The judge isn't gonna make you pay forever. So The good thing about what you went through is it's not going to happen forever. It's only trying to get them through that situation for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
And you have to be married a certain amount of time too to even get spousal maintenance.
That's true. So second question, what was the most challenging aspect of your divorce and how did you navigate it?
So without getting too detailed, the most challenging aspect for me was my children, keeping them safe, keeping them protected, nurtured, and healthy. That the money, I don't really worry about money too much, but that's because I know that what's mostly important was my children. That's the hardest thing when you have your children involved and you're trying to find the best way to navigate the legal system. You have to provide proof, like I said earlier, of the fears you have of harm by the other party. You have to have proof for any type of abuse argument that you may have in court. And unless they have a criminal history, unless they do drugs, you already know it's going to be extremely difficult. So the difficult part was proving what I felt was the truth, but getting what I could under the legal, under the law to protect them. And that's extremely hard. CPS can come into place. You have to think about therapists. And then you have to think about who's a competent therapist for a court. Not just any therapist can testify and give an opinion about her, about whatever she knows about the children and the abuse that you're arguing. So you can't just, you don't think about these things typically when you're getting married. It's only later that you might start learning these things, which largely is the reason you end up divorced or separated.
Right.
So for me, it was a major struggle to go through the emotional turmoil in addition to the financial turmoil, because I had to spend a lot of money to also do my own case because I can't testify. I can't do direct testimony on myself in trial. So, and I still need an attorney to be the buffer,
right.
The face. So I had to spend a lot of money. And so the money, yes, that made me angry. But at the same time, the main issue I had was, how do I help my kids? Because not all of us are alienating our children. Some of us have legitimate good reasons for wanting to maybe decrease the visitation schedule. That's the standard. Trying to find a way to get the right therapist in place despite opposition from the other parent who has all these rights. They're entitled to even enhanced visitation if they want it. And so unless you can prove that it's against the best interest of the children, good luck proving that in court. They can have enhanced visitation, which is even more than the standard possession schedule. And if you're with a certain partner that feels extremely entitled, you're going to have a problem trying to protect your children.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's very, very good. I love this conversation. I'm so glad we had it. There's so many more questions I feel like I want to ask. And I hope that a lot of you will comment your questions that you have for us and Naomi as well. If people want to get in contact with you, how can they find you? I would recommend just emailing me because that would be the fastest way. It's attorney, the way you spell attorney, but in case you don't know, ATTORNEY. My name, Naomi, N as in Nancy, AOMI Garcia, GARCIA @gmail.com. Awesome. Well, we appreciate your candor, your intellect, and your personal story through your own divorce and the legality of it as well. Guys, if you've gone through divorce, let us know in the comments what aspect of your divorce proceeding was the most difficult for you. Let us know in the comments, and we hope to hear from you guys soon.
And if you have a new perspective on marriage, also comment that. And now you have a little bit more information going into marriage or getting out of it.